Hey, what's up, guys? We out here. This is Meili Chow, your Donor Princess, and you're listening to Short and Sweet, a Donor Princess podcast, where I explore women entrepreneurs who are badass and doing amazing things in life or uplifting the AAPI community. And the reason why I created this podcast is because I wanted to have a little bit of representation for my own and to talk about things that I care about, but also you will get value out of. And today I have a really special guest, Nisha Mody. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you so much for joining me in my studio. And I can't wait to dive in on some pretty juicy topics. Boundaries are the one, so I'm going to give you that teaser if you guys are out there who have always wondered about boundaries or, never knew the benefits of having boundaries. We'll really get into that starting from our childhood stories. But without further ado, Nisha, tell us a little bit about, you, how you grew up, your nationality, and we'll have you take it from there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Meili. Super happy to be here. So I grew up in the Chicago area.
Okay.
I moved here about 5 years ago to Los Angeles for a job that I just quit a year ago. But here I am.
You're a transplant.
Yes, I'm a transplant pursuing my dream full time, doing life coaching on my own. I call myself a feminist healing coach. So that's I say it's a life coach with an anti-oppressive lens. So basically, yeah, so it's fun. So I'm like, sometimes I say one, sometimes I say the other. So my parents immigrated from India in like the early 70s, and I lived in Chicago most of my life. And I feel like in a lot of ways it's the typical Asian immigrant, story. Like parents who were kind of strict, like really wanted me to be high achieving, and I really was like very high achieving. Like school felt like the only thing in my life that I was good at.
Yeah.
So I put a lot of stock and a lot of my worth into school. And on the other side, in my household, there was like more of a matriarch than a patriarch. And my mom was someone who, constantly said no to me about everything. She knew her boundaries, but I couldn't have any boundaries, right? So it was like, can't hang out with friends, can't, and not just like hanging out with people, but like, don't tell this person that thing. Like everything felt like a conspiracy. It was only in the past few years have I started to have a lot more compassion for her, for the stuff that she went through, for her own struggles, for her, just being an immigrant alone, like without her family, and not having the resources that I have. Like I have resources to ground my body, to see a therapist, so many different types of ways I can resource myself that she didn't have. There was a time where I had a lot of blame towards my mom, and I think it was a space I needed to be through or go through to be where I am right now and to do the work I'm doing. But I'm definitely, we are healing together, and it's really quite beautiful, and I'm really grateful. And I'm also really grateful, especially because my father passed away almost 10 years ago unexpectedly. And, while I don't feel necessarily, regrets with our relationship, there's a lot with him that has informed what I want to ask my mom, things, how I want to spend time with her, what I want to know about her. So I get to ask these questions and be with her. And a lot of this happened, though, because I started making boundaries with her. You would think like, oh, wait, no, if you have a close relationship with her, what does that have to do with boundaries, right? And one of my favorite quotes by Prentice Hemphill is, boundaries are the distance at which you and I can love each other, or something like that. And I really love that because it's really talking about coming from a place of love, not about putting up a wall and saying like, it's, I hate you or you suck or whatever. I mean, though there are times I've thought that about my mom. I was able to place boundaries. It probably started happening probably in mid to late 20s, over 10 years ago for me, where there was just always this expectation for me to come home and spend time with my parents, or to do things in a certain way that they wanted me to. And saying no was hard because people pleasing and fawning was my response to feel like I belonged, to feel like I mattered, to feel like I was loved. And eventually, though, it's kind of like you keep giving and giving, and when you're not receiving, or when you're not serving yourself, it gets depleting. I was just exhausted emotionally. And I realized it was stopping me from expressing who I truly was, or even like knowing who I was. Mm-hmm. I struggled so much when I was growing up, like, what do I want to be when I grow up? Right. Or like, and I think so much of that comes from, well, who are you? And I think I really struggled with that because I felt constantly defined by, one, like academics, mm-hmm. and two, like, you know, who my mom said I was, or who my mom said I should be, or how I should feel, or how she said I should feel. Because there were times where I would say, like, I'm sad or I'm mad, and she would say, well, you shouldn't feel that way. Mm-hmm. But I did, you know? And again, I think that was her way of trying to have a sense of control and to help me survive in a way, like, help me survive in this world, right? But it really had harsh circumstances for me where I really lost myself. I got into a relationship in my mid to late 20s, which led to a marriage with someone who was abusive emotionally mm-hmm. and physically. Mm-hmm. And that was a transformative relationship for me that culminated with me asking for a divorce, which for me is like one of my greatest accomplishments, honestly. Yeah. Like, I'm so proud of myself for doing that. And it was the beginning of like my liberation, the beginning of my true healing. And yeah, I mean, it's so layered, but I mean, one would think that relationships, like I was with a man, I'm heterosexual, and you know, one would think that's like the father wound, but for me, it was really the mother wound, because she gaslit me and so did he, you know? So it kind of reproduced itself. Those patterns reproduced itself in a different way.
And you were kind of like receptive to it because you're like, oh, this is familiar. I'm supposed to be in this role mm-hmm. where I'm gaslit all the time, and you're going to tell me exactly how to feel and what to do. And I just wanted to say I'm so proud of you for finding that compassion and for doing all the healing work to get to you to this moment right now. I would say a lot of people don't get to that moment, and we live in that childhood way where, oh my God, there's so many layers to like your story that I can identify with, and I feel like a lot of people go through, but we don't really ever talk about it. And we don't really know why we are the way we are until we actually dive in and either work with a life coach or do some personal development and really search for yourself. And so I want to go back actually to your parents. And mm-hmm. when they came here, what were their jobs when they came here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my dad was an engineer. He was an electrical engineer, a telecommunications engineer, and he was that until he was basically forced into retirement when the telecom bubble burst.
Yes.
So yeah, and that's what he always did. Like, he was at that same one company for over 30 years, you know. So that's what he did. And my mom is trained as an artist. She did a lot of textile design when she was in India. She went to art school. And then she did a little bit here and there when we were younger, but eventually she kind of stopped because she felt like she needed to pay more attention to my brother and I as a mother. And I've always, like, my brother and I keep trying to push her to do her art, you know. And it's kind of hard for her to do that and to start things at her age. And she's such a perfectionist, so that also stops her from starting anything. But, you know, she is an artist through and through. And I even see it in her cooking. And anything she does, it's just so beautiful. And I've always admired that about her.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think, you know, when you're talking about your mom, even though we're totally different races and, you know, it's different upbringings, I feel that no matter how much our immigrant parents have struggled to come over here and do what they needed to do, through and through, I feel like they are still artists, but they have to kind of put this facade of like, okay, no, like, I need to, like, you know, do things that are for my family. And the family is such an integral unit in our cultures that it comes first.
Yeah.
And she will let go of that to make sure that her kids are doing well. You spoke about how academics was your identity for a while. And I think for a lot of immigrant kids, our parents, all they want you to do is go to school, do really well, go to college, and get a good job. Mm-hmm. And that is the, you know, impersonate, like, it's basically like that's their American dream for us, to get an education because of whether the economic unrest that was at your home country or the reasons why they left in the first place, and even just the quality of education that is here versus, you know, back in our home countries, which now that I look at it, I don't think is the best, but to them, you know, it was like the very, very best at that time. And like, I can resonate with that because my mom's like, I don't care what you do. You just need to make sure you get all straight A's. And it's so cliche of the whole, like, I got like a B and she's like, why is that not an A? And, you know, as the internet and memes started coming up of like this scenario, I think a lot of people have gone through this same thing where you're like, okay, my identity is I have to be really good at school and super studious, which kind of worked, you know, like I would say I was a really great student, you know, I was a scholar athlete, you know, went to UCSD, like did everything, and very much like your mom, followed what my mom said to do. Because she's like, oh, you know what? You would be a great news reporter and it's a safe job. So like, why don't you go and try it? And upon trying that, I was like, I don't really like this. This is not, I did communications for 3.5 years. The senior year, and that's when I, you know, interned for a news station and decided like, this was not for me. I was not passionate about the stories that were being produced and I just didn't like it. But it just, coming home, I felt like a failure coming back to my mom, right? And she's like, oh, so you don't want to do this anymore? Like, oh, and like, you know, like, and I was like, well, I only did this because you said I should do it. And, you know, it's this whole relationship that we have with our parents, or with our mothers too at this time where you just want to make them happy. You just want to be a good daughter. And you just want to, you know, be the great student and do the great things. But I think at a certain point, you can't really lie to yourself. And you really have to dive in of like, is this something I really want? And that moment where you kind of like, number one, realize that you're people pleasing and stray away. But you start to really listen to like that intuition that's inside of you. And once you find that intuition, you're like, wait a minute, like, I want to have control over my life. And I know that, you know, there's something about this relationship where perhaps it makes you angry. And that's where the whole blame thing came in when you shared, is like, well, I only did this because you said so. And I'm this way because of you. What point did you kind of realize that blame was like not the answer in that point? And that's really hard because that's years of listening to your parents and thinking that they're right, but then kind of when you grow up you realize they have no idea.
Yeah, for me, I feel like I shifted like the blame, I don't know how long it was, maybe a few years. So after my dad passed away, I started writing. I started doing a lot of memoir writing and writing essays. And that was like really the start of my healing. I was in therapy, but writing really helped me feel the emotions and helped me describe what was happening and how it felt. And in those essays that I wrote that like got published in places, there was like, yeah, like I had a mom who did this and like who criticized me or told me like I was doing something, you know, different than what I was actually doing, or feeling something different than what I was actually feeling. And I would try to believe her, but like I knew deep down something was off. And, you know, I was parentified. She would confide in me, you know, all of her problems when I was like 12 years old, like not someone who was able to like provide comfort, but I thought, oh, this is like my role. She's asking me, this makes me special, you know? And so, yeah. And then I ended up in the marriage I did, like you said, but reproduced those patterns. I think there came a point in my writing journey as well as my healing journey in terms of seeing a therapist, going to coaches, etc., where it shifted from the blame to like, I have choices now. I now have more resources to not constantly be triggered by her. That again started with the boundaries. Like I made boundaries. So once I made boundaries, I started getting to know myself better because I wasn't constantly worried about what she wanted. I really focused on myself, and that gave me space to know who Nisha is. And then when I knew who Nisha was, you know, don't get me wrong, my mom still gets to me sometimes, but I mean, that's what else would it be?
That's just mom.
Yeah,
they're always going to get to you. I'm just going to find your spot and poke it.
They know all the buttons. That's for sure. And I feel like now I can laugh at it.
Yeah.
Now I can just be with her or be like, Mom, and she'll be like, all right, you know? And while that took years, it also took me feeling my own autonomy and sovereignty as a human being. That I had choices now. I have choices to be financially independent. I had choices to leave my marriage. All of that was very empowering for me. And I kind of started moving from blame. And, when I say blame, I also want to qualify that with like what you had said earlier. Like, I need to understand why I am the way I am. How did I end up behaving in this way? Why didn't I leave at that one point in the beginning of my relationship with my ex-husband when we started dating, like where he did this messed up thing to me? Why didn't I just be like, this is wrong. Like, this is a red flag. Because if that happened now in my life, I'd be like, no, like, we're not doing this, right?
Yeah.
Whether it was a friend or intimate partner or whatever, like, it's not okay. And I needed to understand how it happened. So yeah, I went back to my mother wound. So therefore the blame or the complaining or the realization started happening. And I think that's the natural progression of things.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily something I regret, honestly, because we all, like, sometimes things have to get messier before they kind of clear up, right?
I think that's life.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why I live here right now. It's definitely a great metaphor.
It's true. It's a great metaphor.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic metaphor for it. Like, things have to get messier. Sometimes people say, like, you have to hit rock bottom. So whatever metaphor you want to use, sometimes that just is what has to happen. And thankfully now I've been able to have more of a deep appreciation for my mom and my dad. And I think losing my dad also kind of gave me perspective on, this is the time I have with my mom. And like, how am I going to use it? I still have my boundaries, but I was even thinking like, my mom moved out to Southern California a few years ago. She lives in Orange County, so it's like a safe 50 miles away from me. Very safe for me. That's like a literal boundary, the distance that I can love her, right? And, I used to be, when she first moved here, that like when I said I would go visit her, that I would have to really ground myself beforehand. But I still kind of dreaded it a little bit. And I was like, I'm only staying there for like 24 hours. Anything more than that, I'm going to start like spiraling.
You're gonna implode.
Yes, exactly. But lately, when I go there, I'm like, well, I'm gonna go see my mom. Like, it's a complete pleasure, So I usually still need to decompress after,
Yes.
but I just don't have that dread, and I enjoy my time with her. And I feel like so much of it is because of boundaries. So much of it is because I feel more empowered in what my own decisions are and where my responsibility is. And when I say responsibility, I don't say obligation. To me, responsibility is like liberatory. Like, I can pick this up because I choose to pick up this responsibility because it feels good. It's not from a place of guilt as much as it is from a place of desire. So yeah, those are some shifts that have been made. And I mean, honestly, it really did all start with making boundaries.
Our mothers, especially our immigrant mothers, are, they have come to this country in a complete survival mode. And I think all of us can agree that it wouldn't be the way that we would deal with it, but also I don't really know how I would deal with it coming to a completely new country and maybe not knowing the language very well or having that many friends here and doing what the best that they could to raise us. But that doesn't mean that there's still our generation, which has felt either the generational trauma that's been passed down to us or just the effects of growing up with like really traditional strict parents and then going into the world as independent women or men. And so, boundaries is something that I have recently also started learning about and practicing, which is so hard for all of you good girls out there who all just want to please your mom and your parents and your friends. And I love how Nisha's been sharing that it's so empowering to make boundaries. So Nisha, tell us a bit about, what is the boundary besides a physical boundary? And, what were your like early adaptations of boundaries? Like what would you say is like a baby step boundary that somebody could get started with today?
Yeah. So I define boundaries. I like that Prentice Hemphill quote I mentioned earlier. The boundaries are the distance where you and I can love each other simultaneously. And I also have like my own definition where it's the intersection of what others want from you and what you could give. So I even like have this Venn diagram of like what others want from you, what you can give, and that little sliver in between. It might be small, it might be big. And I think as we stop people pleasing, we start making boundaries, we might see like the shape of that like shift. So that's how I define it. And to me, it's not a wall to push people out. It's actually something to keep someone in your life.
Yeah.
And sometimes, I know it might sound like it doesn't make sense, but sometimes it might mean cutting off from someone for at least a temporary amount of time so that you can't even have them in your life. And that could even just be in a mental space, an emotional space in your life, right? But for me, I think, first of all, if you have a hard time making boundaries, you are doing boundaries correctly. It is not something that's easy. Our nervous systems are going to be used to going to that fawning response and to that people pleasing. And one of the best advice I got about boundaries is that it's better to feel guilty than it is to feel resentful. Because when I don't have a boundary and I give into, which was one of the first boundaries I made with my mom was just like not visiting her every weekend or whatever. When I felt guilty about it, yeah, I felt bad, but it felt way better than resenting her for a choice that I made, right? I'm actually right now listening to Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart book. And I literally just listened to her own revelation of how resentment is actually, she said for the longest time, she found it in the category of anger. But she interviewed someone on her podcast where they said resentment is actually in the family of envy, where you resent someone because they have something that you want.
I see. That's so interesting.
So interesting. That just like blew my mind.
Yeah. Wait, so what do you think is something that your mom had that you didn't have?
I think she had my attention and I didn't have my own attention. I know. I was like, and that's the first thing I thought, like, okay, my first boundary was with my mom. So what was that? And then she continued, she's like, when you don't make boundaries, when you don't ask for what you need so that you can get it, you're going to resent the other. And yeah, so that's like a very new boundary development for me that I just learned from this book, which I highly recommend. I haven't finished it yet, but it's so great so far. But yeah, so I really recommend making boundaries that are low stakes. So that can be, I'm not going to look at my phone for 10 minutes before I go to bed. Something that doesn't rock your nervous system to the core. There's a really great formula I found, on Instagram, and I didn't make it up, that talks about what you value and how what you value informs the boundaries you make. So it can be, Mom, I really value some downtime 1 day a week. So I can only come on Saturday. I can't come Saturday to Sunday, so I'm not going to. She might not like that, but I'm saying what I value and how that matters to me. And then I state the action that I require, the action and the need that I have, which sometimes might be synonymous. So, really thinking about what you value for yourself, what you value about the relationship. It can be that, hey, I value our time together as a family while we're eating dinner. So I would really appreciate if we put our phones away, while we ate. These are some examples that, I like to give when I teach about boundaries in my different, in my one-on-one coaching and my group coaching, ways that you can integrate that. So it's not just like, I don't want to talk to you, or I don't want to visit you, which sounds like an accusation in a lot of ways. And it's not really getting to the root of like, what is behind it, what in your heart is behind it. Right. So that's kind of like a way I start talking to people about boundaries. And then I also integrate the nervous system with it. And I have people practice with people who are safe. Practice stating those boundaries with someone who's safe, that maybe they'll push, maybe their partner will push back in the role play or whatever, but that this isn't the real situation. So that can help you tend to your nervous system, ground yourself, take an extra breath so that when it really happens, you're a little more prepared.
That's just such a great way to put boundaries in a way where it's not so emotionally attached to your answer, which I feel like is the hardest part about a boundary. When I think about my relationship with my mom, is like our moms are like, they know what they want. They will tell you what they need. But why is it so hard for me to tell you what I want? It's not fear at this point, because now we're older and we're bigger. We're bigger than them. And so it's kind of like, why, how do you kind of celebrate the death of the people pleaser? And how do you really change that? Because I think once I recently realized that being a good girl means people pleasing, means you were putting your needs aside for so long, and now you're able to see it from a different perspective, right? You're older and you can understand. So, like, how do you kind of say goodbye to that people pleaser? Because it does feel good. There is like this like dopamine of like, I'm doing what I was on this earth to do, which is to please. Like, how do you say goodbye? How do you like let go or disassociate that like dopamine of like knowing you're doing something to please them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first of all, when we start essentially rewiring our brains to not people please, we start seeing how when we fill our own cup, we can therefore be more present for other people. Mm-hmm. So it's not that we can't care about other people. No longer people pleasing doesn't mean you don't care about someone. Is that you care within your capacity.
Yeah, that's the right way to put it.
Yeah, and I also think a way to celebrate no longer people pleasing is to celebrate the person you were when you were people pleasing. To be with that feeling. Mm. The more we push away ourselves and our identities and our past, the more we are rejecting a previous version of ourselves or a current version. And I think there's a lot of self-compassion that is, to me, self-compassion is a way to celebrate ourselves for being a people pleaser. Like, this is how I was raised. This is what I was told. Yeah. This is how I was conditioned, especially if you are conditioned as a woman, to constantly tend to other people's needs before your own. And that was what other people celebrated. And then you get that dopamine hit, right?
Yes.
So one, you could do it from like a fun way to retrain that dopamine hit. Like anytime I do something for myself, I'm going to tell a friend and like tell them to celebrate me, or I'm going to get this cookie from somewhere, whatever, right? So how can you retrain that dopamine hit? And that's like kind of purely from like an experimental level. Yeah. And I also want to kind of come from something you said earlier, which is that we often, our parents like grew up here, they wanted us to survive. And there was a time in history where the family really needed to stay together in order to survive. Mm-hmm. That solidarity is what allowed that group of people to continue to reproduce, yeah. to hold some solidarity, to tend to the land, right? So that really was what survival was. There was like that sense of duty. And I mean, I'm not going to like completely speak for everyone in the world, but I can imagine that maybe then there was more of that desire too, to like stay with the family because, you knew that it had to do with where you lived and like, yeah. It affected you. But now things aren't like that as much anymore. And we have, we've exposed ourselves to different ways of being and to self-empowerment and to finding ways to still be with your family while still being on your own. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's just like a new way of being to celebrate. And we, again, going back to self-compassion, need to have compassion for the fact that for centuries on centuries on centuries, we were needing to stay in groups to survive. And now we can do that through chosen family. We can do that through friendships, like platonic friendships, intimate partnerships. And we can do that through family in a way that where we feel that we are in integrity and congruent with who we are.
That is so well said of putting it all together in a package, that you can still have so much love for your family who might have different beliefs and values, who might think that you need to get married and have babies immediately, who might think that you need to do something more conventional in their mind. But we're in this whole new realm that you can create just by understanding the power of your choice, that you don't have to do that. You're an adult, and I love how you brought up the solidarity of, learning how to, because before, sticking together was how you survived, right? Like, and I definitely see that when my mom came over with her 6 brothers and sisters. They had the family business of a donut shop. What better than a whole family working together, pooling money together, saving so that they can move on and get a better job or get a better shop or what it may be. And I think that we kind of disregard that in when we are in the blame stage of everything, where we are like, dang, like, why is my mom like this? Like, why is she telling me to do this? Like, I don't want to do this. And I just think that your identity too, of loving all parts of your identity, goes with self-compassion, which is like, you can't just reject that part of you that, was people pleasing, because that's very much like a part of your chapters of life, but more so like being like, I get why you did that, young Nisha. Like, young Nisha, like, if I could talk to you right now, like, I would want to give you a really big hug and say, you're doing really, really good with what you're given right now. And, you might have to unpack this later, but, you're going to get through it and you're going to do it with, the way that Nisha would do it. And, self-compassion is something that I also am, learning how to do, because it's also how you talk to yourself. Even when we have all these values that our parents have taught us and then that we have also learned and adapted, it still comes back to this whole, how do you talk to yourself? And do you have that voice in your head of, your parents or your family, which it's safe to say most families are very judgmental. After doing a lot of research into my own culture, specifically the Chichao people, they actually are known for being judgmental. And that just, when I heard that from another older Chichao person recently doing research, I was like, it all makes sense. I was like, I always have that judgmental voice in my head. And it's because everyone in my family had something to say about someone else, but apparently it's a trait that Chichao people just have, is that they're judgmental and they're business people, which also makes sense because it's like, okay, you have to be very picky with who you do business with and the integrity of that and the values behind that. But I would have never really guessed that. I thought just the voice in my head of like picking out traits about people, I was like, why? And then you do that to yourself. So once you kind of like go through this whole stage, you may or may not go through it. I recently went through it, and it just makes so much more sense going back to that power of choice, right? Like, cool, parents, family, really judgmental, and that's okay. That's just what they grew up with. But for me, all I want to do is hype people up and talk about how amazing they are, because why would you talk about their negative traits? Like, that's none of your business, and you should just go on and do that. But I noticed that the more that I realized that was one of my values, that I was proud of it, and I kept really attracting more of that and working on my self-compassion of being like, trying to talk to myself the way I would talk to others. I think that's a big thing, is like, the question I asked myself was, how come I can say so many good things about everyone else, but I can't say a single good thing about myself? I don't know. Have you gone through something similar?
Oh yeah. I just saw my therapist today, and this whole conversation about self-compassion was front and center.
Yeah.
And I remember her asking, do you feel like other people have self-compassion? And I was like, no, I feel like we all judge ourselves. But what I think the beauty is that my friends remind me to have compassion for myself. My therapist reminded me to have compassion for myself. And I get to do that for other people. So I think one of the best ways to have self-compassion is to remind other people to have compassion for themselves. Because when I tell myself that, sometimes I feel like I'm just saying the words.
Yeah.
But I'm not really feeling it. But when someone else says it to me, like, for some reason, like, it hits my heart differently.
Yeah, it just like melts into your body. But when you're talking to yourself, you're like, oh, like, Will's eyes, oh, this is another affirmation. Like, but you're not like believing it.
Yeah.
But then when somebody else says it, you're like, and it just like lands different.
It lands totally differently.
Why is that?
I think that we as humans, we're in our head. Our friends are not in our head, right? Our loved ones are not in our head. They're just seeing us like talking to ourselves like this. They're like, do you see your body and what you're doing, right? So I think, we have an ego, and I don't think the ego is a bad thing. We need an ego to move around the world, to make decisions, to, like, for survival too. Like, we need that. It helps, like, it's part of like our consciousness, right? Like, I think it is. And it's also like our drive and our will to keep doing things, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with accomplishing things or achieving things, right? And sometimes it takes a little ego to do that. And it can also be a part of us that talks to ourselves in a not so nice way. Returning to judgment, like, I don't even think judgment's a bad thing, right? Like you said, like your ancestors, like, they were business people, like they needed to use that. And how else will we, in the world, for example, like if you want to talk about, climate change, like, we need to judge the problems that are happening so that we can try to fix them, right? So judgment has a beautiful place in this world. And when we start turning it on ourselves or turning it on loved ones, that's a space to discern where the harm might be happening. So yeah, I think self-compassion and just like loving kindness is a constant practice. And I think, being in our head and also being in a world that tells us that we have to figure out everything out on our own. We have to bootstrap ourselves, bootstrap our way, to success. And I think that's a legacy of colonialism and capitalism too.
Definitely.
You got to figure this out. I know better than you, all this stuff. So it's like, okay, I'm not good enough. So I'm not good enough. So therefore, I'm just going to keep trying to be better. And when I'm not, then I'm going back to I'm not good enough. And then that negative self-talk happens. Where, when we ask for help, when we realize that not one person has to know and be able to do everything, which totally sounds like common sense, right?
Yeah.
But the education system, like getting grades, all that stuff, it's not about like, yes, there are like team projects and stuff like that, but that's like not like how we're really measured as human beings ever since we were so little. Getting grades as such a young person, and like that's just the beginning of rating ourselves on a standard scale that isn't, does not accommodate for people who have disabilities or neurodivergence or just learn differently, right? For subjects that someone deemed that these were the things that we had to know. Like, I don't know, have you used calculus? Like not, I haven't.
I don't think so.
But I was like, I am going to get a 5 on that AP test, like I was so determined. And I was just literally like, speaking of like meritocracy and all this stuff, like, this stuff is still in me. Like I had sworn that like I got 2 B's in high school. That's it. And the other day I was looking through old stuff and I saw that I got 3 and I was so mad, Maylee. I was so disappointed in myself. I was almost like, I don't even know if I'm going to say this to you because I'm like, you're going to judge me.
No.
Like everyone's going to judge me because I got 3 and I thought I got 2. But
look, none of that even matters.
It doesn't matter.
No, nothing, none of that matters to this day. Not even calculus matters, like in what you do.
But it's there. It lives in our bodies. There's that book, The Body Keeps the Score, that I think a lot of people have talked about when we look at trauma. Like our body remembers how it felt to not get an A in a class because that meant something about our worth. And this is where, talking about values, as you were mentioning, I feel like knowing our values, this is an exercise I do with all of my clients when I start working with them.
Awesome.
What are your core values? Because I feel like values are sprouts or like remembrances of our worth. And so, I think values can change. Values don't have to be in English. They could be an image, it could be whatever you want. Yeah. But like, what are they and how are they a way to remember like my own worthiness that is there all the time? Put Post-its on your wall about what they are, stuff like that, just to allow yourself to remember, because we so often forget and go to old patterns because it's just like what our brain does, Yeah,
our bodies kind of remember that familiar feeling of either a negative, positive, whatever it may be, And I love how you shared about knowing your own core values. I think that we might go through life and some get lost maybe in like society and what society thinks that we should care and respect about, but like in really determining your own values, that is kind of like the blueprint too of like where your career might end up or what kind of relationship you might get into is your core values and really like seeking that out in the world for your tribe that also shares that also with you. Yeah. I think like with talking about values, personally, like I love like kindness, respect, honor. I feel like those 3 are kind of stemmed from childhood, and then as I got older, it was more of like unity, and it was like with unity, like togetherness and leadership, and just being like a decent human being. I think those are kind of like one of the reasons why I have this podcast is like I want more of those values to be blasted out in the world. I want that vibration to like be really high and just make sure that, hey, don't forget to be a kind, decent human being. And here, if you're not a kind, decent human being, maybe let's go back and see why that is. When do you think that your values really developed? And do you also pull some from your childhood too? Like, if you could share?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked about my childhood because I'm like, I haven't even thought about what they were in my childhood, and I'm going to go home and like do that. Honestly, my values started coming to light maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I think it started when I wrote like a post on Medium about how it was New Year's. So, there's like the whole New Year's resolutions. So I talked about making goals that were values-based instead of outcome-based.
Oh, I love that.
So, like, for example, if it's like a weight goal, because I feel like that's like such a common New Year's resolution, right?
Yeah.
Like, instead of saying, I'm going to lose 10 pounds or whatever, it's going to be that I really value, like, the health at every size movement. And I'm going to do X, Y, Z so that I'm aligned with that.
Yeah.
Or I really value being able to lift my child.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to, lift them like these many times a day, or start doing bicep curls, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Because when it's based in values, I feel like there's more of an intrinsic motivation as opposed to an external motivation, a societal expectation to be like skinny or whatever, which is like fat phobic, right? Like all of these external societal expectations and pressures that are telling us that we have to, do this resolution, as opposed to this is really what I value. And like, I feel like anything else that happens is a bonus. Like, that's great. So that made me think like, well, I'm saying this, so what are my values,
Yeah.
So I started really looking at different values, and a lot of my values now are about curiosity, and actually you have curiosity and humility like together as a value, because I feel like they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Unlearning the ways that we like traditional structures in the world, whether it's about gender, marriage, finances, like anything like out there that say that how we should, quote unquote, should do things, like unlearning that in my own head and in my own body. I also value compassion, and I really value interdependence. And some of my values have shifted, and like I have my values on my website. That's how important it is to me. And I might be changing some of them soon, because some of them have shifted. The more I grow, the more I evolve, the more I learn, and the more I unlearn, So yeah, but I would say when I was younger, they probably were more like intellect. Like I really valued. I remember I grew up Hindu, so I loved the goddess Saraswati because she was the goddess of knowledge, and I really valued my academics at that point. So I was like, yes, it's like a goddess, not a god, and it's all about knowledge. So I really valued knowledge and intellect, because I felt, like I said, that was like where I found my worth. I really valued friendship. I always had a lot of friends, when I was younger. Probably kindness. And I mean, probably achievement on some level, like I definitely valued achievement. So yeah, I mean, I would say compassion as well. I think, and curiosity too. I think some definitely haven't changed, because they're just not what I value. They're just like who I am, right? And I think some of our values can just be like, I'm just a curious person, and others can be like, well, I want to be more interdependent. So I'm going to choose this as my value because I'm working towards that. And I think that's what's really exciting about values, is that they can shape you and you can shape them, and you can really make them your own.
And also, I love how you shared about, creating goals based on values. And when you look at it from an external societal approach, to me, it seems very jarring. It's like, lose 10 pounds, like now, or like fit into a size 0 now. But like the way, if you really acknowledge that, like that is like one way people do, set goals. But yeah, like when you really look deep within, like, well, why do I want to lose 10 pounds? Why do I want to get stronger? Do I want to lift my baby? Do I want to feel good when I like grab all those groceries? Like, so I think for everyone, it's so important to just look within, and when you're even like establishing your goals for your personal or even your business goals, it's like really looking deep within on that curiosity of like, what am I really curious about? What do I really care about? What do I want to contribute to the world in my specific, artistic way? And it's all so important, because then you start setting goals where you think that you're doing the right thing, or you're going down the path, but then you realize that you're not even aligning with those goals, and it kind of doesn't even work out the way you want it to. As a life coach, you have sessions that are virtual and in person.
I mostly have done virtual, but that's because I started this during the pandemic. So if you live in LA, feel free to reach out. Like, I haven't done in person, but I'd be really curious to try to do it.
And like when people talk about life coaches, and for those of you who don't know what a life coach is, like I think like tell us a bit about how it's different than a therapist or similar than a therapist. And earlier you were sharing about not doing things by yourself and understanding when to ask for help. That like border gap, it's very difficult when you were raised to be independent and being like, I can do this on my own. Whether that's your parents told you could or because they did it on their own. But we live in a society now where you don't have to do it alone. There are, like you said, resources. There's people like you out there who can talk to you about those. So if you could kind of break it down for our viewers who might not know what a life coach is, I've seen it thrown around, on the internet, but like, what really is it?
Yeah. So I would say the difference between a life coach and a therapist would be, well, I'll actually start with the similarities. I think they're similar in that they do support you through challenging parts of your life. There are a lot of different types of life coaches. Just like there's different types of therapists, right? So some might be like, I'm going to be a recovery coach for someone that might be struggling with addiction, or a weight loss coach. And there's probably therapists that support different types of addictions in that way, right? If that's what you want to call it. There might be like a relationship coach versus a relationship therapist, right? And I would say that the difference is coaching is usually more short term. Like people can see their therapist for years, right? Ideally with coaching, that's not the case. I'm seeing the coaching world move a lot more toward group coaching programs. I do both. But I am seeing that. So if you want that community support, I think that's really helpful. And I do feel like it is a little more goal-based. Like I try to do those values-based goals when I start with my one-on-one clients at minimum, so that we can see like where this will go. I actually honestly just start with 3 sessions. Some people start with 6 months. Like it's really up to them. I like that. And then people can add on more if they want to. I'm like, well, let's just hit 1 or 2 things. And then I start with the values and then we talk about nervous system stuff. It just depends on like what is going on in their life and what they want to focus on. And I think that, those are like the main differences to me. I also feel like a difference is I actually provide support in between sessions through a messaging app or through email, which I feel like therapists don't do as much. So I actually feel like oftentimes there's like more constant support. Someone that's like, my Instagram handle is Healing Hype Girl. Like I am a hype girl. Like I want to hype you up. And so I will be doing that as your coach. And not that I don't think therapists do that, but it's just like, it's in a different way, right?
Yeah. It's a different type of listening and a different kind of response.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I do think both, like, I feel like I reflect things back to people like, okay, so what you said is this, or like, can you talk more about that? Like, I think that's similar. But I do think it has a different direction in a lot of different ways. So yeah, I will say that like I call myself like a trauma-informed life coach. Like I do see myself as someone who's trauma-informed. However, I don't treat trauma itself. There are some trauma coaches who really do treat that, and they have extensive training with trauma. I think I have trauma. We all have trauma on some level. COVID was a collective trauma, right? It is a collective trauma. And there's the depths of certain traumas that I feel like some life coaches can access, but a lot cannot, because I feel like you really do need like a specific type of training to not re-traumatize that person. That's just like my opinion, but I have noticed that I've seen trauma-informed coaches, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they deal with trauma itself. It's just that they are sensitive to it and will do their best to not re-traumatize you or check in with you, etc. I feel like those are the main differences and similarities. And yeah, I feel like it's a beautiful way to ask for help. I even as a coach, I get coached by someone because, I'm going to be a coach. I'm going to get coached, right? Yeah. And I also like connect with a lot of other coaches so that I have support, to check in, like, how are you doing things? Like, how do you do your one-on-ones, or how do you do this? Or even like back end stuff. Like, how do you build this? Like, I don't know, because that's the reality of business. So I think it's like coaches on coaches, but like we all need each other and to support each other. Yeah.
Yeah. And like just building your own community of support, whatever that does look like. But I always recommend having someone in your life who could be that like committed listener at the very least, who is outside of your family and your friends and your boyfriend, just like, away, so that they can give you like a different perspective.
100%. Yeah.
Can you share your favorite like I guess, result story, like from like a client, like
Sure,
like where you just, when you heard that, you're like, okay, I'm definitely doing the right thing.
Yes.
I feel really good about this.
Yeah, so I had a client who was trying to write a children's book, and she was just really concerned that she was procrastinating so much. But then she told me like what she'd done on it, and I was like, I don't understand. You've done stuff for it, you know, like it's not that. And she's like, yeah, but like I sometimes I like wait till the last minute, and I'm like, yeah, but you did it. Like I think it was a lot of like not being so hard on herself and coming to that place where she actually realized how much she had done, as opposed to that it's not enough.
Yeah.
So it's going back to that self-compassion. And in the end, she like wrote me a testimonial that was like, I realized like that I had actually done so much, and that I have the ability to do this work. And, you know, like I can carve away like times of day to do this, but I really was in a better place than I thought I was in the first place. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I felt like that was like a huge success story for someone to just be like, I'm okay as I am.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I feel like that's so much of like what I do. It's like, I mean, I wish I could just say like you're okay as you are and like snap everything's better.
Damn.
But it takes a lot more like somatic work in your body to realize like why you feel this way about yourself in the first place. Where does it live in your body? What feelings does it bring up? What stories are you telling yourself, right? That, you know, make you feel like not okay as the human that you are, or not okay being just a human. Like so often we might humanize others, but we don't like allow ourselves to be human.
That is so well put, and thanks for sharing that success story. And I'm sure you have many, many other success stories too, where people have these breakthroughs and they have, you know, a whole different mindset about themselves. Would you say that not being enough is a very common thing? Like, do you think like 99.9% feel that?
I would say so. I mean, I usually mostly work with women, and mostly women of color. And I do think there's something about not being enough and like imposter syndrome, right?
Oh yeah.
So
Gotta love imposter syndrome.
Gotta love that.
Gotta love that, you know, feeling where you just don't feel like you're that person.
Yeah, exactly. And I often think I feel like most of the conversations I hear about imposter syndrome are not from white men, you know? They're usually from like people of color, women, white women, like, you know, usually feel that way. So like, I really see it as something that's structural too, that is then passed down generationally.
Yeah.
But you know, as much as we talk about intergenerational trauma, I think there is that beautiful bridge to intergenerational healing. And I think part of that is seeing ourselves as enough, or not just seeing ourselves as enough, but seeing ourselves as beautifully imperfect, and knowing that, yeah, I don't know this thing, and that's okay. You know, like I don't have to. So I definitely would say that most of my clients like do have that feeling of not feeling enough. And I also feel like so much of it is conditioned to us through society and through dominant structures that like patriarchy, racism, all the stuff that creates and classism too, like creates these like different levels of who is better and who is not, that gets ingrained in us, even though as humans, we are all just human beings, right?
And so, Nisha, like, I would love for you to share 5 tips, 5 golden nuggets of how to get out of not feeling good enough.
Yeah. So I would say the first thing is to ask for help and know that you don't have to do this alone, whether that's with a coach or a therapist or whoever. And the second thing, and this is kind of off of ask for help, is talk to a friend. Call a friend intentionally and ask them to tell you 3 things that they love about you. That can be a beautiful reminder from someone who's safe in your life.
Yeah.
I would also consider imagining your inner child and telling your inner child all the amazing things that they have to look forward to growing up. Mm-hmm. What do you want to share with them about everything that you have achieved? And I'm not just talking about like show off achievements. It could even be like leaving a relationship or growing in a specific way. I also think about, I was talking about values before, so connect your values to things that you've done in your life, what you have done. So one of my values is unlearning. It's like, what have I unlearned in this past week? Okay. So I think those are some really good ones. And the 5th one is to be with those feelings that come up, those uncomfortable feelings of, disappointment in yourself, sadness. We often try to like not feel those negative feelings because we want them to go away, but they are in our body. They are messages that are coming through, right? They're coming through, their information. and we often see them as the enemy, but being with them, you know, it usually takes 90 seconds to just feel the sensation of a feeling before it dissipates away.
Yeah.
So just being with that and befriending your feeling, taking your feeling out to tea, you know, really can be a way to, you know, be with that sadness and then, you know, move forward to the next thing.
Those are amazing tips, and I will definitely be adopting some of those to myself when that happens, and maybe giving you a call. Like, I have feelings.
Please do.
You're like, okay, I know exactly what to do. Let me walk you through that. But I think, you know, being realistic about, you know, your feelings and what you're going through. I know it's super hard right now with social media where you think everybody is living their best life, but in reality, everybody's going through something. And that's why, you know, I believe in compassion for the world, is that not to say one person's going through something harder than the other person, but the thing is, it's everybody's going through something. So, you know, be compassionate to your neighbor, be compassionate to yourself, and know that, you know, you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to go down these spirals. You don't have to, you know, feel like you're not good enough, because you are enough. And I cannot stress that enough. Where can people find you if they're interested in booking your services? And yeah, like, tell us how to reach you.
Yeah. So my website is www.nishaland.com, because who doesn't want to go to Nishaland? And then I'm mostly active social media wise on Instagram, and I'm at Healing Hype Girl. So please do find me, follow me, and sign up for my email list, because we can't always trust social media, and I always send monthly newsletters out and updates about my offers. So please sign up on my website.
Perfect. And thank you so much, Nisha, for being with us today and sharing all that valuable knowledge. I definitely feel like I'm going to rewind this episode and listen to it again, especially when I'm feeling low or not feeling enough. And for those of you who are watching, please hit the subscribe button and definitely let me know how you're loving these episodes, if there's any specific guests you're looking for me to interview. And until next time, holla at your girl.